1 minute ago. Mariah Carey testifies, Diddy's chilling words leave court in shock. It was never meant to be a performance, but when Mariah Carey walked into that courtroom, she commanded the room with the same presence that had once lit up global arenas. This time, there was no music, no backup vocals, just a single voice that for the first time in decades decided to speak. What followed was not only one of the most seismic moments in a high-profile legal case, it was the catalyst of a cultural reckoning. The cameras outside had been rolling for hours. A line of reporters pressed against barricades. But no one expected her. When the court clerk announced her name, silence swept through the room. Not a gasp, not a whisper. Even the stenographer paused. In a tailored black suit with gold accents and large sunglasses, Mariah Carey stepped forward, flanked by her legal team, guarded but unshaken. She removed her glasses slowly. "I'm not here as a celebrity," she said. "I'm here as someone who was there." And then came the first revelation. If they find out what I really do, it's over. Words allegedly whispered to her by Sean Combs, better known as Diddy, inside a private room on a summer night in 2003. The courtroom froze. It wasn't just a quote. It was a loaded statement that cracked open 2 decades of unspoken fear. Mariah described the night in detail. She had just wrapped a music video shoot when her manager persuaded her to attend an exclusive industry gathering in the Hamptons. The venue was a sprawling, high-security estate. Tinted windows, private guards, and a guest list that spanned titans of entertainment. The host, a music mogul, reportedly seeking to rehabilitate his brand. She was tired. She wanted to leave early. But then came the offer from Diddy himself. Want to see the VIP lounge? She hesitated. He insisted. What unfolded next, according to her testimony, was a chilling encounter. Velvet chairs, dim lights, and words that lingered for years. If they find out what I really do, it's over. That was the moment she told the jury, when she knew something wasn't right. When she tried to leave, he stepped in her path briefly. Then came the cryptic promise, stay silent. She did, for 20 years. The next morning she left quietly, but the real shock came later. A black package, no return address arrived at her Manhattan penthouse. Inside $100,000 in cash, and a note reading, "Enjoy the evening by yourself. Thanks, S." Mariah never cashed it. She placed the bundle in a hotel safe and mailed it back anonymously weeks later. "You know where this belongs?" she scrawled on the envelope. She said nothing, not to friends, not to family, but she remembered. Years passed. She moved on publicly, but in private her career began to show unexplained fissures. Invitations stopped coming. Events that once celebrated her presence now seemed to forget she existed. Then came the soft messages from industry insiders. Don't talk about that night. It's not healthy. And one more chillingly blunt, bad things happened to women who talk too much. For the first time, Carey explained that she wasn't the only one at that party in 2003 who felt uneasy. A woman named Lana Young, unknown working in PR, had pulled her aside during the event and whispered that she'd seen something she shouldn't have: a man signing papers under bright lights with cameras running and someone standing over him. That woman disappeared. No one asked questions. But months later, Mariah's studio voicemail captured a haunting message. "I shouldn't have seen that. You should be careful too." The message was erased by accident, but the voice, its fear, stuck with her. By early 2004, Mariah asked her team to find Lana. The answer: she's gone. No job listings, no social presence, nothing. Just gone. These weren't stories she told lightly, and they weren't stories she was expected to tell at all. The defense pushed back. They said it was hearsay, speculation. But the courtroom listened. So did the world. What Carey revealed next was even more damning. In 2005, she was visiting a Manhattan studio when she overheard a conversation through a partition. It was Diddy speaking to a rising R&B star, young, gospel-trained, full of promise. The words were etched in Mariah's mind. "You remember who gave you those records? Whoever owns your masters is remembered by you." If you think you can walk away, remember what happened to the last girl who tried. The artist vanished shortly after. Tour canceled. No show at an award ceremony. No questions asked. No answers given. Mariah didn't name her, but the courtroom and the industry understood the silence. This wasn't just a story about a pop star and a music mogul. It was about fear, how it's weaponized, normalized, and enforced through power persuasion and sometimes simply a look. And then, in 2006, at an awards event, she met his gaze across the room. He smiled. Cold, calculated. You stayed silent, it said. But by 2025, she wasn't silent anymore. In the next segment, her testimony digs deeper into cover-ups, corporate entanglements, and the unraveling of a carefully constructed empire. This was no longer just a trial. It was a public reckoning. Mariah Carey's voice had already shaken the courtroom once. But as her testimony continued, it became clear this was no ordinary witness. This was someone who had lived inside the machinery of fame, watched the gears turn, and now, for the first time, was pulling back the curtain. By 2008, she told the court, she had grown increasingly wary. She had begun asking questions quietly at first about an untelevised music event, co-sponsored by Diddy, that didn't align with its supposed scale and reach. The venue was massive. The artist lineup high profile, but no footage aired, no credits rolled, no press release followed. Carey's former assistant uncovered something strange. Shell companies' shadow accounts and wire transfers routed through obscure entities. When Carey's staff brought it up, they were warned directly. We don't dig into that. You shouldn't either. The message was unmistakable. Stop asking. It didn't end there. Shortly after, Carey began receiving anonymous threats, veiled as friendly advice. There were rumors that unreleased studio footage might surface. Whispers about tabloid scandals from years past suddenly poised for a comeback. Her publicist was warned. Her manager was advised to steer her back into safer waters. Then came the 2010 award show. She was invited to present Diddy with a Lifetime Achievement Award. She refused. 3 endorsement deals vanished within a week. No calls, no emails, just silence. In court, the defense challenged these claims as circumstantial. But the prosecution leaned on the pattern. What Carey painted wasn't a single incident. It was a culture. A system designed not just to promote power, but to protect it at all costs. And then the most emotional moment of the day arrived. When no one ever asked me to testify, Carey said quietly, I figured it was best to sit tight. But I promised myself, if that day ever came, I would not hold anything back. And she didn't. She described a private moment in 2011 when an industry executive took her aside after a benefit event. You're still amazing, he told her. But I hope you're not thinking about revisiting that old night. It's not good for anyone. This wasn't business. This was survival. The courtroom sat frozen as Carey detailed how fear, subtle as a glance or coded as a compliment, had kept her in check for years. And yet even then she admitted she was one of the lucky ones. She still had a voice. A platform. And now she was using it. The prosecution shifted focus, pressing for broader connections between Carey's experience and others who had also drifted from the spotlight under strange circumstances. One by one, stories began to echo hers. Dancers who stopped showing up, assistants who vanished, rising stars who fell suddenly silent. This wasn't just about what happened in a private room in 2003. It was about a culture of silence, enforced by control access and fear. Carey didn't flinch as she recalled another haunting moment an executive once told her, half joking, you don't cross that circle. You don't even look into it. That circle now sat in court. Accused? Exposed? Carey ended that day's testimony with no emotion, no flourish. The world now knows who he is, she said, and I'm telling it because I believe in the power of the truth. Outside reporters scrambled. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended. Mariah testifies. Diddy trial. If they find out what I really do, became the line replayed across late-night shows and investigative specials. Inside the courtroom, the tone had shifted irreversibly. The defense, once confident, was suddenly silent. The jury, focused. The judge still but observant. As the next day dawned, it became clear this wasn't just a testimony, it was a spark. And the fire had only just begun to spread. By the third day of Mariah Carey's testimony, the atmosphere in the courtroom had fundamentally changed. What had begun as a high-profile trial against a music mogul now carried the unmistakable weight of something larger, a reckoning with an entire era of celebrity impunity. Carey's voice remained steady, but the content of her words struck deeper, peeling back, not just her own experience, but the cultural machinery that had allowed such silence to persist. She spoke of award shows where backstage whispers grew louder with every year, about rooms where executives hushed conversations the moment she entered, and about the conversations she overheard, short-coded, always suggesting a shared understanding. Don't name names. One moment stood out. In 2012, she recounted she had questioned a familiar face in the industry about a quiet disappearance, an assistant she once worked with, now unreachable. The answer came with a forced laugh and a dismissive wave. She asked too many questions. It became clear that what Carey had described wasn't a set of coincidences, it was a system. A closed network where reward was doled out in silence and consequence in resistance. But the courtroom wasn't prepared for what came next. Carey revealed that in 2014, during a private gala hosted by multiple entertainment figures, she'd witnessed a moment that changed her forever. A young artist, nervous, clearly new, was taken aside by someone from Diddy's team. The conversation was hushed, but the body language unmistakable persuasion mixed with pressure. Mariah didn't intervene, not out of approval, but out of fear that had by then become muscle memory. I told myself it wasn't my place, she confessed. But I also told myself I would never forget her face. And I haven't. Carey emphasized that she wasn't there to blame others for staying quiet. She understood it. She had lived it. But she had also reached her limit. Then came the story of the 2016 award nomination campaign. Her label advised her to remain cordial with certain legacy figures. Play nice. Smile for the cameras. But she refused. I said no, she told the court. And then the rumors started. Unfounded stories surfaced online, recycled gossip insinuations about her health, her professionalism, her worth. She was suddenly portrayed as difficult, unreliable, temperamental. But this time she didn't retreat. She stayed in the industry, stayed visible. And she started documenting conversations, messages, who was in the room, who wasn't. It became clear Carey was preparing not for vengeance, but for truth. And when the indictment finally came years later, and Diddy stood trial, she knew it was time. Her testimony tied together the threads that many had ignored for years. She wasn't just testifying about one night, or one envelope, or one whispered threat. She was testifying to an entire playbook. And slowly people outside the courtroom began to realize they'd seen pages of it before. The public reaction grew swift and sharp. Celebrities who had once posted pictures with Diddy now deleted them. Artists who had stayed silent began reposting Carey's words. Respect, many wrote. Others simply used her, quote, "If they find out what I really do, it's over." Within the courtroom, Diddy's team tried to regroup. They suggested Carey had misremembered events, that she had motives, that she was misled. But their strategy fell flat. Carey had nothing to gain. No album to promote. No legal settlement to win. Her only motive, it seemed, was honesty. And that made her dangerous in a way they hadn't expected. The prosecution's case had a new backbone. Witnesses who once hesitated began responding to subpoenas. 2 former executives from Diddy's record label, it was rumored, had agreed to provide sealed testimony. More names surfaced. More stories began to align. And then came a comment from one of the jurors relayed through a court sketch artist. When she looked at him, it was like she was finally free. And he knew it. The courtroom wasn't just a stage anymore. It had become a mirror reflecting the many faces that had turned away for too long. And now, They were all being forced to look. As the trial entered its fourth phase, Mariah Carey's testimony had taken on a life beyond the courtroom. News programs led with it. Think pieces emerged overnight. Social media cycles became saturated with fragments of her quotes, videos from the courtroom, and long threads analyzing every word. But inside those walls, amid legal arguments and procedural motions, Carey brought attention to something far more elusive, what was never said. She spoke carefully but with unmistakable clarity. There were files, she explained. Things people told me not to read. Contracts under fake names. Agreements that didn't make sense. Invoices signed by no one I ever met. In 2018, she asked a junior staffer to look into a private concert deal involving multiple legacy artists. The response from upper management swift and final. Don't touch it. These weren't just scattered red flags, they were patterns. Carefully concealed pathways designed to obscure accountability and insulate those with power. But now in court, the paths were being retraced slowly and with purpose. Carey described a moment in 2019 that felt like a tipping point. An email anonymously sent, never followed up, contained only a screenshot of a non-disclosure agreement and a 2-word subject line. Remember me. She didn't know who sent it, but she remembered the initials at the bottom. That same year, another artist she knew distantly reached out. They'd met years ago at an industry event, shared a brief conversation about the pressures of being visible and female in the music world. Now the message was clear. I'm thinking about telling my story, but I don't know if it's safe. Carey never pressured her, but she kept the message, just in case. Because she knew she said that her own silence had once been someone else's safety net. We made a pact without speaking, that we'd protect each other by not speaking. But as more women stepped forward in the wake of her testimony, that silence began to unravel. Former dancers, backup singers, tour staff. Their statements weren't always admissible in court, but they echoed the same themes, fear pressure, and systems built on whispered warnings. One particularly harrowing account involved a vocalist who had toured with a major label in the early 2000s. She hadn't been seen publicly in years, but after Carey's testimony aired, she posted 3 words on a long-dead Twitter account. You were right. No follow-up, no reply. But the message reached millions. Inside the courtroom, Carey was asked if she felt responsible for not coming forward sooner. Her answer was measured. I felt guilty, but also strategic. I knew if I spoke too early, I'd be torn apart. I wasn't sure I'd survive it. But now I know I wouldn't have survived staying silent either. She paused and then added, there are things I still can't prove. I don't have the footage. I don't have the paper trails. But I have the memory. And that has to count for something. And it did. Because in her quiet restraint, Carey wasn't just accusing, she was illuminating. The things that couldn't be caught on camera, the glances, the coded comments, the unspoken rules, these were the mechanisms of control that had gone unchecked for years. The courtroom sat in stark stillness as she detailed how often her instincts had been right. How many times she had seen someone disappear, not literally, but career-wise, just enough to scare others into line. And when the prosecution asked one final question, why speak now? Carey didn't blink. Because I saw what it did to the people who didn't. As the gavel signaled the day's recess, the air felt heavy. Not with drama, but with clarity. This wasn't just about who broke the rules. It was about who made them, who upheld them, and who was finally choosing to name them. As the final stretch of testimony approached, it was no longer a question of whether the world was watching, but how it would respond. The courtroom had become more than a legal arena. It had turned into a theater of truth where every word carried weight far beyond the walls. And standing at its center was Mariah Carey, composed unwavering and speaking with a conviction sharpened by 2 decades of silence. This time, the prosecutors asked a different kind of question. Did Mr. Combs ever threaten anyone else in your presence? Carey hesitated just for a moment, and then, yes. She described a day in 2005. She had arrived early at a recording studio in Manhattan. She was hoping to catch her producer before their session. Instead, she caught a voice through a thin partition, familiar firm, and, unmistakably, Diddy. He was speaking to a young artist, one known for her powerhouse voice, and gospel roots newly signed, and on the brink of mainstream breakout. Carey did not name her directly, but she confirmed that the initials, the career arc, and the sudden disappearance from public life matched only one person. The conversation was brief, but brutal. "You remember who gave you those records," Carey recounted him saying. "Whoever owns your masters is remembered by you. Act as if you had no constraints. And then, if you think you can walk away, remember what happened to the last girl who tried." The court sat in stunned silence. No one moved. Even Diddy at the defense table remained still, his eyes fixed forward, expression unreadable. Carey explained that she never confronted him about it. At the time, she didn't know what she could say, but months later, the artist in question canceled a tour. Missed an awards show. Vanished. No explanation. No statement. Only absence. It was a pattern too familiar to ignore. And it brought Carey to the closing point of her testimony, a point she delivered not as a celebrity, but as someone who had lived with the burden of knowing and not speaking. "I thought I was protecting myself, but really, I was just surviving. Now, I want to live with the truth." As she descended from the witness stand for the last time, the courtroom didn't erupt. It hushed. Her words didn't invite applause. They demanded reflection. Outside, the media frenzy surged. Her statements flooded every major network, dissected in real time by panels of commentators, legal experts, and cultural analysts. But even amid the noise, something rare occurred, a collective pause. The narrative had changed. Where once there was a titan of music, now stood a figure under siege, not by scandal, but by the unraveling of a myth. Diddy's legal team scrambled to reframe. They called her eloquent but mistaken. They argued that memory is flawed. But their words couldn't match the power of hers, because Carey had done something few dared. She had walked into the storm willingly, knowing the risks, and chosen not to retreat. Former collaborators began to speak. Artists released statements. Influencers reposted her quotes with single-word captions: respect, finally, truth. Even veteran industry insiders, once silent or complicit, started to create distance. Images with Diddy disappeared from feeds. Testimonials once reserved for press releases now turned reflective. And somewhere behind closed doors, former label executives were said to be negotiating sealed testimony. Carey's words had done more than shift a case, they had shifted an industry. As one unnamed juror later confided to a reporter, she wasn't trying to destroy him. She was trying to survive him. The trial continued. Other witnesses followed, but none struck the same chord. Because Carey's presence, her choice to speak, transcended testimony. It had become the story itself. The story of an empire that believed it was untouchable. The story of a woman who refused to let silence define her. And in that moment, as the dust settled and the headlines rolled, in one thing became undeniably clear. She hit the high note, and the silence shattered.